My name is Brian. I'm going to be moderating this session. Welcome to the 2021 Sunstone Symposium, Session 354, King Benjamin's Challenge, the work of the Bountiful Children's Foundation. At Sunstone, we're making it a goal to build a community that allows many ways for people to express their faith. Our tagline is, "There is more than one way to Mormon." We invite you to help us build a community where all paths are given space to be better understood. Please support us in our mission by making a donation and subscribing at sunstone.org. After the symposium, Sunstone staff will edit, polish, and re-upload all of this year's sessions videos to the Whova app. It'll take about 2 weeks for everything to be available, but once it is, every video will be available to watch and rewatch in the Whova app through the end of 2021. Please type any questions into the Whova app to be addressed during the Q&A, or if you're watching in person, we'll open the audience mic for questions at the end as time allows. And I'm just going to keep an eye on the Whova app, and if there's any questions in there that pop up, I'll go ahead and voice those questions for you. I'll step up to the microphone and pin a couple of those questions and ask them at the end. Just a little information about this presentation that I think Bob made notes here. What is the life of a child worth? The philosopher Peter Singer represents a challenge to those of us living in the developed world. With very little sacrifice, we each could save the lives of children living in countries where the standard of living is insufficient to sustain life. In his book, The Life You Can Change, Singer challenges us to act morally to save the lives of others. A free copy of Singer's book is actually available at www.thelifeyoucansave.org. The Bountiful Children's Foundation, which addresses the needs of malnourished Latter-day Saint and other children living in impoverished conditions, can provide the necessary nutritional supplements for a child for an entire year for less than $100. The foundation is looking for 1,000 people who are willing to donate $100 a month, which together will save the lives of 12,000 children. Singer has convinced tens of thousands of people to make such small sacrifices. Can we persuade you to do the same? I'm just going to take a moment to introduce our speaker before we begin. Bob Rees, visiting professor and director of the Latter-day Saint / Mormon Studies at Graduate Theological Union, is the author of 2 recently published books, A New Witness to the World, Reading and Rereading the Book of Mormon, and that was published by Common Consent in 2020, and also Why I Stay, The Challenges of Discipleship for Contemporary Latter-day Saints, Volume 2, published by Signature Books this year in 2021. And I'm going to go ahead and give the floor over to our presenter.
Thank you, Brian, and thank all of you who are here really and virtually. I was fumbling around with Zoom this morning. It occurred to me that in some future day, people will divide this period between BZ and AZ. Before Zoom and after Zoom. If there ever is an after Zoom, there may not be. This introduction of this topic, King Benjamin's Challenge. What is the life of a child worth? As Brian introduced this by quoting Peter Singer, Peter Singer's book, The Life You Can Change, has been a life-changing book for me because it has helped me to understand ways in which I can give more of what I have to help. This is supposed to not to do that, but we'll get back here. And you'll have to recognize that you're dealing with someone whose technological prowess is limited. And so I have my handy man here.
I'm sorry. So we're trying to go back to the previous slide?
Go back to that one.
This one?
No, this one.
All right.
And here we are. Okay.
right.
So I'll try not to touch anything to keep this good man on his toes. One of the things that I value about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, we used to speak of that as Mormonism, and many of us still do, is that it establishes that the religious and spiritual context in which members are encouraged to develop the practice of making small sacrifices. When I joined the church at age 10, I remember my father teaching me that every dollar I earned, I should take 10 cents of that dollar and pay it in tithing. To a 10-year-old, 10 cents was a lot of money in those days because I was born during the Great Depression. Anyway, these small sacrifices, fasting for one day a month, paying tithes and offerings, giving generously of our time and talents to bless others, are part of what the church makes possible. Making such sacrifices tends to focus our attention on others, those served or blessed either by our giving up something, like food 24 hours once a month, or by giving something beyond what we have, time, money, material goods, etc. Giving something or giving up something that blesses others. This small discipline, as I speak of it, the giving, has a benefit to bless others. As Lowell Benyon argued, the reason for staying in the church is both to serve and be served, and to bless and be blessed, which I feel certainly is a wonderful way to summarize the purpose of the church. These small sacrifices prepare us to be ready to make big sacrifices if we are called to do so. They say, get ready to move to Zion. I've never liked Missouri very much, but I'm ready to go. I would guess that many of the saints who pushed and pulled handcarts to Zion had prepared themselves for doing so by making small sacrifices. In this session, I'm going to invite you to make small sacrifices, keeping in mind Thoreau's argument that a person is wealthy in relation to the number of things he can afford to do without, which for most of us turns out to be a lot. I'm aware that most, if not all of you, already make a number of small sacrifices, and even some big ones. Many of you have cultivated the principle of tithing, of giving your time, of doing service projects. Recently, a member of our bishopric came over to my house and helped me fix a technical problem that was beyond my expertise, almost beyond his, but not entirely. So these contributions to real people in real time, in real places, and also making sacrifices to people who live far from us. We don't know, for example, most of us who is blessed by our fast offerings or other givings, but we know that people are. According to a study published last year, quote, Utah ranked first overall in the highest percentage of its population who donate money and time, and the highest percentage of income given. I think that's an impressive statistic. So I begin with the question of what we do when we are confronted with the challenge of giving more than we are already given. I want to show a short clip of an incident in China. And we will go here, and here, and here, and here.
In the surveillance video, 2-year-old Wang Yue is shown walking alone on a small street near a market. She's struck by a van. The driver decides to flee the scene. Over the next few minutes, 18 people pass by, ignoring the little girl who lies bleeding in the road.
Now my guess is that all of you are shocked by that scene. You'd probably be shocked if I also know how to run this computer. So, little girl is struck by a van. She's lying beside the van actually stopped on her. So when it finished rolling over her, that is, the van driver realized, not having paid attention, that he hit something. He jumped out and saw who it was and kept going. 18 people came by and didn't do anything. My guess is that all of you, either here in this audience or in the virtual audience, would find that not only morally indefensible, morally reprehensible. We would say, how can somebody do that? What is it that explains that kind of indifference. And we all know stories in which this has happened. And yet, as we see this and say, that's horrible that human beings would not respond, seeing this child lying there bleeding, that child was taken to the hospital but died. And yet, every day, 19,000 children starve to death in the world. All of them, or almost all of them, preventable. So, in my class at University of California at Santa Cruz a number of years ago, called Modern Moral Problems, I used several imaginary scenarios presented by moral philosophers that cause people to consider their values while looking at their humanitarian needs. The following example is from Peter Unger's book, Living High and Letting Die. It's a very challenging title, Living High and Letting Die, which seeks, quote, to probe our intuitions about whether it is wrong to live well, as we do, without giving substantial amounts of money to help people who are hungry, malnourished, and dying of treatable illnesses. So this is one of the scenarios that I presented to my class. Ted has put all of his savings into a classic Italian Bugatti, which is worth, as they are, $3 million or more. And he wants to get it insured, so he's driving it to get it inspected so it can be insured. And on his way to the insurer, it stalls on a railroad track. And he can't get it started, so he gets out and walking up the track to try and find a mechanic or someone can help him. And as he does so, he notices a freight train coming down the track, heading straight for his car. His whole life savings tied up in this, but he sees there's a switch. And he runs to the switch and starts to pull it. But as he does so, he sees that if he pulls this and changes the train to another track, there's a child playing on the track. What does Ted do? Does he say, I know this is my life savings, but that is an actual child? Or does he say, I could do so much good in the world if I had this car and what it's worth? And so the question that I gave to my students is I said to them that according to the UN, a child life could be saved for $200 in the world. And so the question is, would you, my students, be willing to scrimp and save a little bit in order to save the life of a child? And I would show them another scenario just to let them think about that while they did it. And I'll show that to you, hopefully. So this is Peter Singer. And this is a dilemma or a similar situation that he presents to us. I would present this to my
Botanical
students.
gardens you have here down near the harbour, and there's a shallow ornamental pond. It has a few ducks in it and a few water lilies, but you know it's not really deep. Certainly not for you, for an adult. It's maybe waist deep. And as you walk past it, you see that there's something in it, and it's not just a duck. You look more closely, and you see that it's a small child. A toddler has fallen into the pond and is flailing around, apparently in imminent danger of drowning. What do you do? The first thing you would do, I imagine, is you would look around and you would say, who's looking after this child? Where are the parents or the babysitter? Can't be a toddler on her own here in the park. But you don't see anyone. There's nobody in sight except you and the toddler. So the next thought you have is, well, I better jump into that pond and pull that child out. And then perhaps a less noble, less wholesome, as Rinpoche might have put it, thought occurs to you. Oh, unfortunately I put on my favourite pair of shoes and my favourite pair of trousers or dress, whatever you're wearing, are quite expensive. I'm really attached to them. They are not made for wading in muddy water, and they're probably going to get ruined. So it's going to cost me maybe a few $100s if I save this child. Now imagine you did have that thought, and imagine that you then said, well, It's not my child. And I didn't push the child in. I haven't harmed the child, have I? Just happened to be walking past. So I'll just go on my way. Forget about the child. Maybe somebody else will come by and save the child. Who knows? Don't see anybody who could, but maybe they will. Maybe the child won't die. But anyway, it's not my business. I'll go on my way. Would that be an acceptable thing to do? I hear somebody say no, and I'm pleased that that's your reaction. I hope that's everybody's reaction. Somebody say yes if you like, if you think it's not your reaction. Well, anyway, generally when I've discussed this with my students, that is the reaction. They say no, that would not be acceptable. It's not only that it would be very nice or very kind or very charitable of you to save the child, it would really be wrong not to save the child, just to walk on your way, because you don't want to have to spend those few $100s in replacing your shoes and your dress or trousers or whatever they were. And of course I agree with that. But that shows that we think that we do have a positive obligation to help people in great need, especially where it's something like saving the life of someone whom we know is innocent. And I chose a child just because we know that children are innocent. It's not the child's fault that she's fallen into the pond. But of course, adults too generally are, innocent, don't deserve to die through causes like that. And where the cost to us is not an excessive burden, not an excessive sacrifice. There is some cost, but it's one that we can cope with. Our lives are not going to be irrevocably damaged because of what we do in saving the child. So, if that's right, if in those circumstances we have an obligation to help, to save a child's life or to save an adult's life, then let's think about the situation that we're in, not in this imaginary circumstance, which could happen but would be very rare, but every day in the world in which we're living. We know that there are more than 1 billion people living in extreme poverty in the world today. Extreme poverty is defined by the World Bank as, roughly speaking, in a sort of Australian 2012 dollars, maybe living on less than $2 per day. And that's not what you could get for $2 Australian if you went to one of these countries and changed it at the bank, where often the exchange rate is very favourable and you think, gee, you could live really cheaply in this country. That's the purchasing power equivalent of $2 Australian. It's what buys as much in the local currency as $2 will buy here in Sydney. Well, okay, maybe not in Sydney, maybe in Brisbane or Adelaide, I don't know, but something like that. So it's very, very little. And of course, the consequence of that is that many people go to bed hungry, that some children die simply from malnutrition, but more commonly, they die from other poverty-related causes, like diarrhea, because they don't have safe drinking water. And when they do get diarrhea, not a fatal illness when it occurs in Australia, when they do get it, they can't get any medical treatment. They can get dehydrated, and although there's very simple, very inexpensive treatment that could save their lives, they can't get it. It's not available in their village. They don't have transport to get where it might be available. Or they may die from malaria because they don't have a mosquito net. And if they do get malaria, they can't get the drugs necessary for it. Or they haven't been immunized against measles, and they die of measles. And a large number of causes like that. And even if they don't die, and UNICEF estimates that I think it's something like about 8 million children die every year from poverty-related causes, which is fortunately down from what the figure I gave when I wrote The Life You Can Save, which was published in 2009, when it was...
So, this is the film that I show my students.
Wow, look at this. 94% of people believe company culture is important to an organization's success. Frankly, I have no idea what the other 6% are thinking.
This ad brought to you free. So I present that to my students, and then I say to them, okay, I know you're all really think that you're poor, but you are going to one of the great universities. It's not inexpensive, and maybe if your parents or someone, or maybe you're on scholarship, and I would say, how many of you own a computer? And they all do. And how many of you own a car? And quite a few of them do. And how many of you come from families where your family owns the house? But still, all students feel poor. And so I challenge them. And I say, according to Peter Singer, you could save the life of a child for only $200. And what I'd like to ask you is, would you be willing to commit this year, the next 12 months, to just saving $200? I know you feel poor, but there are things you could do. You could cut down on the number of films that you see. You could not eat out as much. You could cut a skiing trip down by a day or two. It wouldn't be too difficult for you to raise $200 over the next year. So raise your hands, how many of you would be willing to do it? And very seldom is a hand raised. There's always, well, let's talk about this. Let's consider the alternatives. And what about UNICEF? Aren't they doing this? And we pay our taxes and we do all of these things. So they really kind of squirm when it comes to that. And then I remind them again that they come from the upper 1% of people in the world. So the question that I want you to ponder is, why do we have difficulty thinking about even making small sacrifices? And I'm saying this to people who make, as part of their religious and their social life, making small sacrifices. That is, I'm aware that most of you give abundantly. But the question is, if you knew that you could make some small sacrifices and actually save the life of a child without it being really inconvenient for you, or maybe slightly inconvenient, that you could help save the life possibly of a Latter-day Saint child, but certainly of a human child. And you would probably be surprised at the Bountiful Children's Foundation that some friends of mine and I started about 12 years ago. We provide supplements, nutritional supplements, and other nutritional aids to both Latter-day Saint and other children in the developing world who face food insecurity. What I'd like to do is give you some idea. Most of us, we hear about this and we generally turn the television if the images of starving children are too graphic or if they last too long. So I want to show you a little bit about what malnutrition is, what it may look like. If I can. So these are the kinds of pictures that we see and we tend to turn away from very quickly. But this child was because this child was in a hospital, and my co-founder, Dr. Brad Walker, before there was a Bountiful Foundation, used to be called Leahona, but we now call Bountiful. He saw this child. The stake president was a physician. They went to the hospital. Brad is a doctor. He saw this child. This child did not survive, and he was shocked by that and decided he wanted to do something, and he wrote an article in Dialogue. I read the article, and I called him and said, I want to do something. I want to be part of this. I had a foundation, and so we made that foundation the Leahona, now the Bountiful Children's Foundation, and we began working in this one Central American country, and for the past 12 years have been attempting to feed these children. The mission of the foundation is to provide nutritional supplements for pregnant women and lactating mothers, and to nurture the potential of infants and toddlers to lead healthy, productive, and self-reliant lives by eliminating malnutrition. Different types of malnutrition. I remember people saying, well, people from Guatemala are just naturally short. But a doctor friend of mine said, look at the second and third generation of people who have immigrated from Guatemala or the Philippines to the United States and see their children and their grandchildren as opposed to their parents and grandparents. So you have a normal child, you have wasting, which is low weight for height, you have stunting, which is low height for their age, and then underweight, which tends to be a combination of wasting and stunting. Our foundation focuses on the first 1,000 days of a child's life and on those days in which the child is in utero during the time the mother is nursing the child, because a malnourished mother is going to produce a malnourished child. And if we can intervene early enough, we can forestall that. The reason why we choose the first 1,000 days, and there are many malnourished children beyond the 1,000 days, but the reason we do that is that it's in the first 1,000 days that 80% of the brain develops, and the body, of course, goes through its development. 80%, by age 5, it's 90%. And if you haven't given the child sufficient malnourishment, or sufficient nutrition, the child's body and its brain become compromised. And the reason why that 1,000 days is important is if you miss that, you miss it forever. A child whose brain is compromised through malnutrition will forever, in mortality, be compromised. I show this picture. My wife Gloria and I were in Guatemala a couple of years ago. Guatemala is one of the poorest countries in the world. People live on about $2 a day. Poverty is rampant. These are two boys from Guatemala, born approximately the same day. Both of them 5 years old. Moranto is a normal child. They had parents who were able to feed him. Satraka, not so fortunate. And you can see this dramatic size in their stature. And again, the impaired brain development, the weakened immune system, the greater risk of disease, etc. This gives you what I find the most dramatic impact of malnutrition, the size of a child's brain by age 3. Imagine your own child having this kind of a limitation by the time they're 3, and that you were powerless to do anything about it, as most of these people are. Most of the parents simply are too poor to buy the necessary food, and so the child's brain does not develop. You see the long-term effects of malnutrition, as I mentioned. These kids whose brains are compromised, if they are fortunate enough to go to school, most of them drop out. They can't really succeed in school. They have increased susceptibility to disease and illness, adult functional impairment. Think about that a child who is born in this situation grows up and because of those limitations is going to be dependent upon his or her parents or government or church or community, for some of them for the rest of their lives. This shows what happens. In the middle you have the average distribution of IQs, and then you find children who are severely or acutely malnourished begin to dropping into these lower segments of intellectual cognitive impairment. And so a child who is has moderate acute malnutrition or has severe acute malnutrition falls into these lower percentiles. And this, it seems to me, is one of the great tragedies, especially when one recognizes how frequently this happens. I will quote in a minute this passage from the 25th chapter of Matthew. And we translate this in the King James Bible. Inasmuch as you have given to the least of one of these, you've given it to me. In the language which Jesus spoke, which is Aramaic, when Jesus taught that parable to his disciples in the 25th chapter of Matthew. That translated literally is, inasmuch as you gave food or didn't give food to one of these, my little brothers and sisters, you gave it or you didn't give it to me. So, this powerful and disturbing situation, my guess is that a question that most people ask after seeing this slide presentation, after seeing those scenarios of the man or the people passing by the child hit by a truck or a van in China, of a man having the choice to save his car or a child, of a man who wonders, is it worth, I have $150 shoes and $200 pants, and if I walk into that pool to save that child, they're going to be ruined, and I'm not sure I want to do that. Having seen those, and having seen what I've just shown, my guess is that most people's response is, what can I do to help these children? Well, the good news is that because of the work that we're doing, and we're not the only ones doing this, but we're the only foundation exclusively addressing malnutrition among Latter-day Saint children, and as I say, 50 to 60%, sometimes other children. The good news is that we can save the life of a child for half of what UNICEF said. In other words, UNICEF gave a figure of $200. We actually can save the life of a child in the world for $100 for a year. $100 a year to provide the necessary nutritional supplements for an infant or toddler, or to help a pregnant woman or lactating mother. Think of the life of a child being saved for such a small cost. We know that we can do this because we've been doing it for the past 12 years. We started in one stake in Central America. As I mentioned, we now are feeding children in 200 stakes in 18 countries, from Mongolia to Madagascar and from the Philippines to Peru. So our challenge, the challenge that my colleagues and I and the Bountiful Children's Foundation want to give to you today is, would you commit to making enough small sacrifices so that you could save $100 each month for the next year that would make it possible for you to save the lives of 12 actual malnourished children who have names, who have identities, who live in families, who have personalities, and who have, hopefully, if we can do something, they have futures. To do this, our challenge is to do this year. My guess is you'll find it easier than you might think, and if you can do it for this year, why not do it every year? In spite of the fact that most of us feel we don't have enough money, in truth, everyone listening to me today represents, as I mentioned, the top 1% of people in the world. That is, our lifestyles are superior to 99% of the human family. That was absolutely dramatic to us when we were in Madagascar, which is one of the poorest countries in the world. All of us spend money every month on things we don't actually need. According to an article by Peter Singer in the New York Times, quote, the average family in the United States spends almost 1/3 of its income on things that are no more necessary than going out to nice restaurants, buying new clothes because the older ones are no longer stylish or haven't worn out very far, eating more than we really need, taking vacations, etc. That is, our lives don't depend on this most of the time. So much of our income is spent on things not essential to the preservation of our lives and our health. If we donate just a small portion of the money we could save to a charitable organization, for example, the Bountiful, that has a proven record of accountability, it could mean the difference between life and death for children in the world. So what we'd like to do is invite you to take this pledge. If I get back to my PowerPoint here. I got someplace else, didn't I? So I'm going to go to this. On our website, we've just put a new part which is called King Benjamin Challenge. So what I'd like to do is to pledge you to make enough small sacrifices to save $100 this year. And if $100 a month is too hard, we invite you to invite your children, your grandchildren, your cousins, your uncles and aunts, your grandparents, anyone who might help you. Gloria and I do that. Our family raises about $5,000 a year to adopt 100 children in a stake in Guatemala, and our stake participates in that program as well. So, inviting them to make these small sacrifices so that they can have and experience the joy of doing something this dramatic. So, King Benjamin Challenge is named after the great Nephite king, who, as you recall from your reading of the Book of Mormon last year and hopefully this year, he said, "You will not suffer your children that they go hungry or naked, and also you yourselves will succor those who stand in need of your succor. And you will administer of your substance to him that standeth in need, and you will not suffer that the beggar putteth up his petition to you in vain, and turn him out to perish." If I can get enough of you, or if my colleagues can get enough of you to accept this challenge, as I said, over the next year, every month you can save the life of a child in Zimbabwe or Peru or Bolivia or one of the 18 countries in which we work. And if you cultivate this as a habit, then you can do that every year. I'm going to have some of my associates, essentially my wife, pass out some forms here for the people in the audience. And you can go on, those of you who are in the virtual audience, you can go on the Bountiful website, bountifulchildren.org, and just give them one of those slips of, each of those slips of paper. And so I want you to think about what it would take for you this coming month to save $100. And I'm to make this interesting. Gloria and I are going to give $100 to Bountiful in the names of 3 people here and in the virtual audience who come up with the best ideas for how to save $100 this coming month. And if you go on the website, there's a place for you to put your name and email address so we can send you the list of suggestions that people have for saving money, and we want you to send us your best ideas. How are you going to do that? One of the things that we make it possible for you to do is we've got a booth out here, and we can also, if you write to us, we can send you a sticker you can put on a mason jar or on a plastic jar like this, and it says $1 a day keeps malnutrition away. And in our home, we have a jar with a sticker on it sitting in the middle of our dining room table. And when we come home, if we have extra change, or if we have a few extra dollars in our wallet, we put it in that jar. And at the end of the month, we look and see that. And the other thing we do, we've passed out, and we can give you IOUs. And so we write IOUs when we come home from wherever we've been shopping or whatever. If we've been able to save $10 by buying something less expensive than we really wanted, but it works, we put a little sign saying, "I owe Bountiful Children $10 for doing this." And so over time, in this giving jar, you can accumulate that money. And I just wanted to give you just a couple of ideas of things we've done to show you how easy it is. We've had a digital subscription to the New York Times for a number of years, but we always got the print edition of the Sunday paper because it had not only lots of good things in it, but it has a wonderful spelling bee puzzle that we like to work. And so we decided, what a big sacrifice to give up that. So we canceled our subscription, our paper subscription to the New York Times. So we're saving $192 a year, $16 a month, by not having that come. And that saves almost the lives of almost 2 children. Gloria had a birthday on July 8th, and instead of asking for presents, she asked her family and her friends to donate to the Bountiful Children's Foundation on her website, and that garnered $150. So 1.5 children. When we eat out, we always share a meal. We share an entree, which means we save $25 a time. We eat out about once a month. So that's $300 just by eating food that, I mean, we don't need the food. There's stuff in our refrigerator, but we like to go out and eat once in a while, but we share an entree. I know you wouldn't tell by looking at me, but my wife cuts my hair, and that saves about $200 a year, or enough to feed 2 children. We use Amazon Smile, which you can, if you go on and you order things from Amazon and you do it through Amazon Smile, your purchase, a portion of your purchase goes to the Bountiful Children's Foundation, which you can identify as that. Last Christmas, my wife and I gave a $25 gift to each of our 19 grandchildren as a gift to the Bountiful Children's Foundation. We wanted them to know that we were giving a gift in their name, so that their name appears on as a giver on Bountiful, and we do that to teach them that giving is something to do, and that we get, at Christmas, we get lots of things we don't need, even some things we don't want. And sometimes we can take them back. One of our grandsons, he was in college, like a lot of college students, pretty poor, but on his Facebook page, he offered to do a push-up for every dollar that somebody donated. He did this for Black Lives Matter. And he was surprised to have to do 1,000 sit-ups because 1,000 people donated $1. He was so impressed that out of his meager college funds, he gave another $1,000 to that cause. This is a grandson who went with us on one of our Bountiful Nutri Tours to Colombia a few years ago, and he participated in weighing these children and measuring them and giving them these nutritional supplements. As a 16-year-old, it changed his life. He wants to go again, and next week Gloria and I are going to Guatemala to continue this work, and we're taking some friends who want to go along and see some of the sites, but also mostly to help with these children. One of the things you can do is what we've done in the San Rafael stake in Northern California, is to invite the members of our stake, as I mentioned, to participate in this. Any of you out there who want to host a fireside, to bring your friends from your ward or friends from your neighborhood in, I volunteer to do a Zoom fireside for you. And if there's 100 of them, I'll do that. Because I, like the other members of our foundation, we want this good news about how easy it is to save the life of a child, to get to as many places as we can. Some of you belong to organizations that match giving. So go to your company and say you want to give something to the Bountiful Children's Foundation and ask them to match it. I'm sure you have better ideas than this. And as I mentioned, there's a place on our website now where you can put in your ideas. The 3 best ideas we'll donate $100 in your name to the Bountiful Children's Foundation. And we're not asking anyone to give up necessities. We're not asking anyone to take vows of poverty. And we're only saying give up enough of things that you can afford to do without. The day may come when you may be asked to sell all of your goods and go to Jackson County, but we're not among the people asking you to do that. We're just asking you to try and save enough to save the lives of a few children. In the Book of Mormon, King Benjamin says that we sometimes think of not giving to others because we say they've brought the condition on themselves. It's their fault they're poor. But he rejects that excuse because he says we all have been given abundant gifts from God that we don't earn and we actually don't deserve. And therefore, we should not hold back giving to others because, in his words, we are all beggars before God, on whom we depend for all the substance which we have of every kind. And now if God, who has created you, on whom you are dependent for your lives and for all that you have, he uses the word all 3 or 4 times in this short passage, for all that you have and are, if he doth grant unto you whatsoever you ask, which is right, in faith, believing you shall receive. If God does that for you, oh then, how ye ought to impart of your substance that you have one to another. And echoing what Jesus said to his disciples after he had just finished washing their feet, he says, if you believe, do this, he says, to others, to one another. And if you believe this, see that you do it. The other thing that we encounter sometimes as we're talking to members of the church, and not just members of the church, to others in our affluent country, is that people talk about, well, we don't want to make these children dependent because we believe in self-reliance. Self-reliance, I think, is one of the most enlightened doctrines of the restored gospel. Self-reliance is what brought the saints across the plains. It's what has helped the saints to be self-reliant in so many ways. But to require children, especially infants and toddlers, to be self-reliant is, I think, an obscenity. By God's design, children are dependent on us, and for a very good reason. It's God's way of teaching us how to go outside of ourselves, how to practice giving to others, how to practice sacrificing our time, how to get up in the middle of the night to attend to a crying child, how to console a teenager who comes home with a broken heart, how to do all the things that parents do. So as we've learned to do this, we are teaching them self-reliance by showing them how we can help them to become self-reliant. As I said in a meeting of a couple of years ago with a group of people talking about this problem, and someone raised that question, well, should we be concerned about making these children and their parents reliant, dependent? And I said, of my travels around the world, addressing the needs of these children and meeting with their parents who come to our screenings with their children in the hope that we might be able to do something. These are among the most self-reliant people I've ever met. I think of a family that I met in the Philippines. Mother and father. The father was disabled, wasn't able to work. The mother had a menial job. The 2 boys who should have been in school went down to the beach during the day to gather shells that they could sell on the street so the family would have enough food on the table. The self-reliance of these people is ennobling, and it's part because they are taught this. But I said to this group of people, the best way to teach a child self-reliance is to keep him or her alive long enough so he or she even knows what that word means, and then to model self-reliance. Let me close with some words from Elder Jeffrey R. Holland. His great sermon in the October 2014 General Conference, which is called, Are We Not All Beggars? After citing Amulek's reminder that rich and poor, we are all to do what we can when others that are in need. Elder Holland, addressing the concern that I've just addressed about making people dependent, he said, now, lest I be accused of proposing quixotic global social programs or of endorsing panhandling as a growth industry, I reassure you that my reverence for principles of industry thrift, self-reliance, and ambition is as strong as that of any man living or woman alive. We are always expected to help ourselves before we seek help from others. Furthermore, and I think this is really important, I don't know exactly how each of you should fulfill your obligation to those who do not or cannot always help themselves. He says, I don't know what you should do, just as I don't. He says, but I know that God knows, and he will help you and guide you in compassionate acts of discipleship you are conscientiously wanting and praying, if you are conscientiously wanting and praying and looking for ways to keep a commandment he has given to us again and again. This is not a new commandment. This is a commandment as old as the history of our sacred record. And so in giving you King Benjamin's challenge, this is one of the ways I think that you can do that. Going back over the examples that we began with of the child in China, the man with the dilemma of expensive car and new shoes, anticipating those objections, Peter Singer asked, what is the most good that you can do? I saw a t-shirt the other day that was designed by a friend of mine, and it says, do good and be kind. So, what Peter Singer asked, what is the most good you can do? What is the most good you can do with $100? It's hard to think of $100 doing more good than to save the life of the child. This is similar to the question we ask in our family. What is the most loving thing I can do? What is the most loving thing I can do today in this place with this person? It's a hard question to ask, and it's a harder question sometimes to answer. But if we ask it, the chances are we will find a good answer. Certainly, one of the most loving things we can do is to help these children live and have their full capacity to thrive. It's serendipitous that this week's Come Follow Me lesson is on the topic, to whom much is given, much is required. And the scripture from 1 John 3:17, which reads, how does God's love abide in anyone who has the world's goods? How does God's love abide in us? How does God's love abide in anyone who has the world's goods and sees a brother or a sister in need and yet refuses help? And I like this translation, which I just came upon the other day, the International Children's Bible. They put it this way. Suppose a believer is rich enough to have all that he needs, not necessarily all he desires, but all he or she needs. And he sees a brother or a sister in Christ who is poor and does not have what he or she needs. What if the believer does not help the poor brother or sister? Then the believer does not have God's love in his or her heart. I say this on the premise that all of you to whom I'm speaking not only have the love of God in your hearts, but you have learned how to give that love to others and to give it abundantly. Christ does not require of us what he required of the rich young man who came to him asking what he needed to do to be saved, to sell all he had and give it to the poor. He doesn't ask that of us, but he does require of us to give something. Paraphrasing Elder Holland, I don't know what or how much you should give, but I hope when you consider what you might give, you will think of these children. It is significant that in Aramaic, as I began this, the actual language Jesus spoke, the least is translated, and that inasmuch as you give it unto one of these, my little brothers or sisters, you've given or not given it to me. Before Jesus left, just before his crucifixion, he taught that great lesson in Matthew 25, those two parables about the virgins who were prepared. And everyone within the sound of my voice probably is among those virgins who had their lamps filled with oils. He also, in that same Matthew chapter 25, he gives that great parable of the least, of inasmuch as you've given unto the least, or not given unto the least of these. That great lesson that he was teaching is the last lesson he gave before he was crucified. And then, after he was crucified and resurrected, It's so interesting to see the disciples. These are 12 apostles. If you sometimes find yourselves being critical of 12 living apostles, go back and look at those 12 who spent those 3 years with Jesus, walking to him, listening. And Jesus is gone. And what does Peter say? Brethren, we need to have a council meeting. We are now in charge of the church. The Lord taught us how to care for the church. He's turned it over to us. Let's get together and see what we can do for these branches of the church that are spread throughout his kingdom. No, what they said was, what in the world do we want to do now? And Peter said, well, we know how to fish, so let's go fishing. But Jesus wasn't through teaching them. They're out fishing. And while they're out fishing, Jesus is doing something similar to washing their feet. He's fixing breakfast for them. Think of that. The Lord of heaven fixing breakfast for you as he was fixing breakfast for them. When they're coming in, he knows they haven't caught enough fish for breakfast. So he asks them, have you caught fish? And they say, not very much. Throw your net to the other side, he says. And they catch what I think is wonderful. They count them. There's 153 fish. There's so much more than they could eat, so much more than they need. And as they're having breakfast, Jesus says to Peter, feed my sheep. And Peter, do you love me? Yes, feed my sheep. Do you love me? Yes, feed my lambs. Do you love me? Yes, feed my sheep. Peter's irritated. Why are you asking the same question? I already answered it to you. Jesus asked another question. What are you going to do with these? Now, it's wonderful, I think, as someone who is a professor of literature, who teaches language, and the English language at least, and how to express ourselves. It's interesting that scriptorians have argued for a couple of thousand years about the antecedent of this. What are you going to do with these? These people? These teachings? What? I think Jesus means all this extra fish which is sitting there. What are you going to do with those? There are people out here starving. I've just fed you. You're hungry. You're no longer hungry. What are you going to do with these extra fish? I think that question is a question Jesus is asking us in a way. Not in an unkind or unloving way, but in a way to cause us to question, what are we going to do with these houses, most of them with more rooms than we need, with pantries with more food than we need. When I was in Guatemala a number of years ago, one of the things we did, and we try to do service projects as part of our work, and there was a family, I can't remember, 3 or 4 children, that they didn't have a stove. They had no way to cook their food. So we went and built a rather crude stove for them, and they were so delighted. And I hadn't thought about the fact that people don't have stoves, they don't have refrigerators, they don't have pantries, or if they have them, they can't go to them. This is a little exercise for you to think about. Keep track of how many times you go to the kitchen this week, to the refrigerator or to the pantry or to fix food or whatever. Just keep track of how many times you can go and do whatever you want, eat whatever you want, drink whatever you want. Now, I say all that not to make you feel guilty, not to shame you, because I know that you are all giving things. If you're not giving as much as you might, none of us does. What we hope is that you will give something more, something beyond, something that will help you to raise up these children. And before we turn to some questions, I want to play this as I'm thinking about this idea of our raising up these children. Listen to this song. So, I remember a number of years ago when I was in the Philippines doing this work, one of the things that I want to affirm people is how grateful the parents and the leaders in the community is when we help these children. But I remember we were up in the mountains of Mount Shillak. I'm trying to think of the place we were. That's not it. We screened a group of children. Found 70% of them were malnourished. The next day I saw the stake president and I said, I'm just curious. We've been screening children in your stake and found that 70% of them are malnourished. And I just have this question. What percentage of the people in your stake pay tithing? He thought for a minute. And having been a bishop, having lived in the North American church most of my life, I am aware that if 30% of the people in a ward pay their tithing, that's probably average. I'm sure in some of the stakes here in Utah, it's higher. But he thought for a minute and he said, I would guess about 70%. I thought 70% of the children in this stake are malnourished, but 70% of their parents are the parents of these children are malnourished. But I remember at this particular screening, as we come in, the mothers and fathers, mainly mothers, bring their children, and we set up stations where we take their name and their gender, their address, and we take their height and their weight. And I lifted this little girl up and held her before me, and I said to somebody, we need a doctor, because she was in such critical condition. So that idea of lifting up, as we are being lifted up by the Lord, be able to lift somebody, but I know you all do that. And so we invite you to do a little bit more. See if you can challenge yourself and your family to put $100 worth of IOUs in a box, or to write a check for $100. Some of you can do that. To make some small sacrifices so that at the end of the next 12 months, there are 12 more children alive in the world. Thank you for whatever you can do and are willing to do. And now, if there are questions, Ryan will come up and we'll try and answer them. Let me begin by, I've done this long enough, I know that your first question in my presentation wasn't what I can do, but your first question is, what is the church doing? Or why isn't the church doing? So what I'd like you to know is that the church is, first of all, malnutrition has been basically a silent or an invisible condition for the most part. Many of these children look well fed because they're getting lots of corn or potatoes or sweet potatoes, but they're not getting nutrients. And so it's until we started doing these measurements and evaluations and measuring the condition of these children, we didn't know how many there were. But we now can tell how many, and we give them supplements right away. We come back in 6 months and we measure them again, and we see what a huge difference it makes for a child. So the church has been unaware. In fact, when I was in the Philippines and come back from 10 days of screening, I said to the area president, this is what we found, and he said, thank you for letting us know that. I didn't know that we had these malnourished children. So part of it is the church discovering this. I'm very grateful. My colleague Tim Heaton, sitting at the back, is now on the church nutrition committee. The church has a new committee of nutrition, and that committee is studying the very thing we're talking about. And I'm grateful that that committee includes the Relief Society and the primary presidency, so that the women of the church and leadership are feel responsible for doing this. So the church is attempting to find a way. They're doing pilot programs in several countries. They're studying this in the hope that they will be able to roll out a church-wide program to address malnutrition in the coming years. So that is anticipating what I thought would be a question that would come. If anyone here has a question, sitting in the audience, yes.
If you don't mind, come up to the microphone just to make sure that everybody on the
Yeah.
broadcast can hear as well.
Oh, geez, thanks. Okay, whatever. My wife and I work with a charitable organization in Zambia, and the head of that is actually a very dear friend of ours and is LDS. My question to you is, what does it take? You're in 18 countries. What does it take to select another country and to start something there? In this case, you said you're in Zimbabwe. Just to the north is Zambia, so it's not that far. So maybe we can get together and talk.
It's a good question. We are in many countries, but if we had more money, we would do a lot more in Guatemala, a lot more in the Philippines. We're only meeting the needs of some of the children in those countries, but there are also a number of countries that have malnourished children that we would like to be in. Tim, what would it take for us to open another country? 10,000? 20?
Depends on the country and how many kids. It's variable, but we need somebody in that country that has the support of the church to run the program, and then we could do one stake for maybe $6,000. The whole country, a country like Nigeria would cost at least $10,000 a month. A country like Zambia would cost.
Let me repeat Tim's answer because he wouldn't have gotten it over here. Tim said that if there was someone in the country that was interested in this program, that we could go in and open a stake for $6,000 a year. If it's a big country like Nigeria, where Gloria and I will probably be going next year, it'd take $10,000 a month. We started out with about $30,000. We're now at about $1 million. It would probably take $20 million or so to feed all the malnourished children in the church, and that's not very much money, especially when you think of the payoff for it. So thank you for your question. And let me say also thank you on behalf of all of the humanitarian organizations that are doing good. One of the things that we honored Warner Woodruff earlier this week with a Radiant Mormonism Award, because Warner has done more than anyone in the church to multiply humanitarian entrepreneurship around the world. He and his students and friends have started 24 NGOs. They raise $30 million a year to do that. So there are a lot of good things that Latter-day Saints are doing, and we are so grateful to be working with them. So if you're giving to another organization, continue to do that, and if you can find just $100, we'll take it. Anyone else have a question?
Can we just get together and talk about that?
Sure, happy to talk with anyone afterwards. Thank you. Tim?
I have a question.
Oh, okay.
I have a question real fast. And so most LDS people, they say, okay, I'm going to pay my tithe at 10%. I make $90,000 per year. I'm going to give $9,000 to the church and I'm done. And so should I give to the church and to your organization and to charities, or, where does that fit in?
Well, I would say that most people who contribute to Bountiful Children's Foundation do both. That is, they pay their tithes and offerings, and they do this. Part of the reason we're going with this modest, what I hope is modest, $100 a month, is that we think almost anyone can do that just by making some very small and smart decisions. it can be kind of fun. On the plane ride here from San Francisco last week, I had forgotten my earphones, and I like to watch a movie, and the stewardess came around selling them, and I was saying, $2, I don't know. Well, I'm going to splurge. So I said, yeah, I'll do it. She said, I'll come around and collect the $2. And I said, okay. Went through the flight. I watched my movie. And I went up to her afterwards, and I said, you forgot to come and ask me for $2. She said, that's on me. I said, it's going to go to a good place. That $2 is going to go to help the children. She said, that makes me feel so good for not having asked for it. So it can be fun to do this. It can be creative. It can be imaginative. Yes, we're not telling anyone, do pay us and don't pay your tithing. The payment of tithing is a pledge between you and the church and the Lord. This is something that we think has great dividends. The fast offering funds that people pay go to help the needy in their ward or stake. In one of the districts that we were in Guatemala, down in the south, people, to give you some idea of poverty in that country, one of the returned missionaries who was there with us as a doctor, who was trying to set up a health program whereby doctors from North America can go and spend a week or two helping address problems. He came back to help in our screening. He said, I've just come back from the south of Madagascar with a population of 1.5 million people. There was one pediatrician. That gives you some idea of the degree of poverty. But in this one district that we screened, there were 90% of the children were malnourished, 9 out of 10. And that bishop or stake president, district president, couldn't hope to bring in enough fast offering funds to take care of even a significant portion of those. So we're trying to help. We're in dialogue with the church. Tim is attending meetings here in Salt Lake with leaders as to how our work, the church can learn from what we've done, how we can work with the church to expand and develop this work. Do you have any questions from?
Yes, there are a few questions here that came in from online. We've got about 14 minutes left, so I'm going to go ahead and ask one of these questions, and then, if anyone here has a question, we'll let them ask it. There are 2 questions on here online. So the first question is, can you elaborate on the nature of what are the supplements that are used in the program, and how is the church welfare program related to your effort? Thanks.
Tim, do you want to come up and answer that question here? Tim is our CEO and has more knowledge than I do about this. But I was talking to Dr. Polly Walker this week about the nutrients. There are 2 basic problems. One, children not getting enough nutrients, and others that they're not getting enough protein. There's some kids that simply aren't getting the protein. So Tim, I defer to you.
We get the best supplement we can find in each country. The 3 main sources of protein are either powdered milk, soybean, or peanut butter. So depending on the country, we'll get a product that has that in it, and then micronutrients that are needed.
And as it turns out, you can provide those micronutrients for not very much money.
If there's anyone here present that wants to ask a question, I do have one other online. Does anyone want to ask a question before I get to that one? So the other question that came in from online is, what percentage of the donation goes to overhead and salaries of the directors?
That's a great question, and am I happy to say that I don't and have not gotten anything from doing this work, that Tim is, there are people who support some of the administrative work, including some of the fundraising that we do, but Tim, I think we can say, we have been saying from the beginning that 95% of the contributions that you make go to help children. But again, I defer to the CEO who has all wisdom and all knowledge.
Most of the directors, it costs them money. They donate. So Bob's right, 5% of the funds are spent in the United States for part-time employees, storage, insurance, and so on. 95% goes to the country. Some of that goes to the coordinator costs to procure and distribute the food and have a cell phone, and the rest goes to buy supplements. So compare that to any other nonprofit. I haven't seen any that can beat it. And I would add that the directors here, we have professional public health, accounting. So I'm a professional program evaluator. So it's not just whoever. It's professionally run.
May I ask a question? Is it possible to do a monthly recurring?
Yeah, we have a lot of people that do that.
See, I just watched him, so this is a question.
Oh, he asked if it's possible to do a monthly reoccurring a donation. Yeah, and on our webpage it gives you an option to do that. Yes.
One of the other questions on the line was, will you sell your mailing lists? Oh, you were
Yeah.
about to read it, so.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and read that. No, that's great. Thanks for reminding me. Kay asks online, she says, I give to several charities, but now I get requests of 20 plus different charities every day in the mail. If I donate to your group, will you be sharing my name and information with other charities? I'm trying to get these charities to stop wasting paper and costs to mail me every day. I don't know if they will stop. So will you put her on mailing lists?
That's a big no, we will not. We never have shared any of our mail.
Thanks, Tim.
The fortunate thing is that some we had for example, this year we had 2 anonymous donors who said we want to support fundraising. So some of that kind of money would go to some of the things that we hope we can do in terms of just reaching out in some new ways to raise more money. But 95 cents of every dollar given goes directly to help a child. And I must say also, just how touched I am by these coordinators we have. We pay them practically nothing to yet do this work, to get the supplements, to take them to the children. And one of the ones that I've known longest is in Guatemala. When I was in Guatemala 5 years ago, she was wanting to take some of the very small amount that we give her to Bountiful to help other children. This is a woman who lost a child to malnutrition. So there's something, it just seems to me this is what Jesus wants us to be doing, is to helping these children. And my motto has become the one that Mother Teresa gave. We can do no great things, only small things with great love. And that's what we're inviting you to do, is to do a small thing with great love every month. And again, invite your family, make it fun. I can't think of any place I can put $100 that would do more good than $100 to Bountiful will do. And I'm sure when I meet the Lord, he will say, Bob, you could have done a lot more. $100 is just kind of opening a little crack. I think of all the ways you wasted money and spent them on things you didn't need. So I'm doing kind of a reevaluation here that I hope will go on and on. But thank you all. We love this work, and we invite you to be partners and participants with us. It is sacred work, and it's joyful work. So thank you again. And you can visit our booth out here where you can pick up things.
Thank you, Bob, and thank you, Tim. If there's anyone that is watching online or even watching it a little bit after, and there's a question that you didn't get the chance to ask, go ahead and feel free to submit it on the Whova app. There's still a chance that Bob can go on and answer it, or even Tim or anyone else that has the that has a login for Whova. So thank you, Bob, for the inspirational message. Thank you, Tim, for being here to answer questions, and thank you for the invitation. Have a great rest of your day at Sunstone.